think we need to talk about the framework, the language instruction framework, and you have a graphic of that, and you see in the graphic that the progression is illustrated with containers. And the first container is a thimble. And how much language can you put in a thimble? And then a cup, and a bowl, and then a picnic basket. The lines across the framework are illustrating thresholds that students have to cross in terms of their cognitive and linguistic development in order to move to the next level. So in thinking about that framework, it's very important to see it not as a static number, but as a dynamic process that teachers can use to select the appropriate material. For example, looking at your 2 video clips, if you see that those boys are at a certain level, which I think is about an exit 2, when they're developing paragraphs of language, possibly even moving into a 3, that's very exciting. And you think, oh, these boys are quite competent and capable. If you look at them at an exit 1, a little thimbleful of language, or an entry 2, the very bottom of a cup, you think, these are very limited boys, and you treat them differently.
So it's very important for the classroom teacher to have a good understanding of second language acquisition, not only to be able to meet the instructional needs of the ESOL child in the classroom to enable the student to progress in the language development, but also to make good decisions about whether a student needs special services, additional special services.
Yes, that's right. And it's very important too, I think, in thinking about special ed, that if we place a student in special ed, what kinds, in other words, it's not just the sorting mechanism that says you must go here or you must go there. But if we decide that we're going to use the special ed services, that we do it in a way that enables the student to achieve. And it isn't just a way to find a label for a child. So whether they're in special ed or they're in regular ed, they need the support of a teacher who understands them. They need to develop meaningful literacy experiences. They need to have instruction in phonics that doesn't penalize them because they may not hear and be able to process the language because they're still learning it. Anyway, in looking at this framework, and clearly we're not going to discuss the entire framework today, I think it's important to look at the form, which is what we've been looking at in these language samples, and the functions. Are the children reporting? Are they asking questions? Are they explaining? Are they sharing? What is the function of the language? And then what is the content? And see how those change as a dynamic process. Clearly, when those boys were making the tornado in the bottle, it was a very dynamic experience, a motivating experience for them, and so their language was much more elaborate. We look at the work of Labov and other people, we see that that's very important, that we get those elaborated codes. The other important point about literacy is that it anchors memory. And I think that Eddie's examples where he put his finger on the picture said, I have some literacy here. It's helping me remember what I did before, and it's helping me share what I did with you. And literacy is really a tool for communicating with a wider audience and communicating across time and place. Sometimes we forget that and we think it's just literacy for literacy's sake. So you're right. Understanding the second language acquisition process is very important. Understanding the power of literacy and the penalties that children are assessed when they aren't assessed in ways that let them learn literacy and acquire it naturally and meaningfully. Many Haitian children who have not been exposed to literacy, or many rural Hispanic children and many other students from language backgrounds other than those two, when they come from rural areas and they haven't gone to school, most often look as if they have handicapping conditions. And after a year or two of literacy, of meaningful literacy exposure and experience and expectations, become somewhat literate and have very different profiles in terms of their processing of language. connecting meaning, as Eddie's teacher did with instruction. She was always relating the meaning to what was going on, and she related it in both languages, and she related it to home context and school context in written forms and oral forms, and so she was constantly making meaning and mediating meaning making in that classroom. Using standardized assessment, we're not saying don't do that, but we're saying temper it with informal assessment. I've given you a sample, a chapter that you may want to share with your faculty on a very dynamic process of instructional language assessment that not only looks at language development in terms of those areas, but looks at different aspects like narrative. Narrative is very important because all children have stories, and all children want to share their stories with other people. We can look at their narrative and looking at the functions of language and how we can promote literacy development across functions, because a lot of times we're asking children to perform a function that they've never ever performed. Like many children are socialized not to ask questions, and then we ask them to ask questions and they have no idea how to do that. How do we also help children monitor their own language development? So this framework can help them do that, and of course it can help the teachers to help the children in monitoring that teaching learning process. So I hope that this will be useful. I don't think we need to see special ed as a very separate thing over here on another planet, but that we see that the dynamic process at the university level that brings together ESOL and special ed and regular ed, as you have done it so beautifully at the University of South Florida.